The floor is slick with shattered porcelain and the scattered pages of a ruined resume, the exact moment Lila's life collides with New York's most dangerous crime lord. Notice the terrifying stillness of Dante Morelli. He watches her not as prey, but as a puzzle in the cold chrome lighting of his 47th floor office. He offers her a life in the shadows, a treacherous dance of laundering millions and dodging bullets in the dead of night. You can almost hear the ticking clock of their fatal attraction as they rewrite his dark history, sealing a devastating bond over midnight whiskey and the ghosts of his murdered brother.
Their story did not begin with a meeting, but with an impact. The sound of shattering glass marking Lila Bennett's first day. In that single, frozen instant, she became the uncontrolled variable in the world of Dante Morelli, a man known for excising subordinates over a minor typo. His reaction, however, was not the expected rage, but a flicker of grim fascination. An accident involving spilled coffee and broken artifacts became the catalyst for a volatile symbiosis in the city's hidden power structure. This, then, is the chronicle of their convergence, a dangerous fusion of chaos and control, destined to either forge an unbreakable bond or incite total destruction. The ascent to the 47th floor of Morelli Tower was, for Lila, a journey into self-doubt. She clutched a worn portfolio like a shield, warding off the reflection in the polished steel, a distorted image of an imposter. The professional armor she had carefully constructed was beginning to fail, evidenced by stray strands of blonde hair escaping their hold. A small coffee stain on the hem of her navy dress felt like a profound flaw she could not conceal. Her reflection received a whispered, desperate plea, "You're fine." A rationalizing voice inside her fought for control. "This is a simple function, an assistant, answering calls, organizing files, elementary accounting. You have managed far greater complexities." The elevator announced its arrival with a chime. The doors parted to reveal a space so sterile it felt hostile to organic life. The aesthetic was a trinity of black, white, and chrome, mirrored in polished marble. The furniture was a study in expensive discomfort. Behind a severe, futuristic desk sat a woman whose taut hairstyle seemed the source of a chronic tension headache. She looked up. "You are late," the woman stated, forgoing any prelude. Lila checked her watch. "I'm 7 minutes early, actually. Mr. Morelli requires his appointments to be 15 minutes ahead of schedule. You are late." The woman's eyes were flat, brown, and lifeless. "Your name?" "Lila Bennett. I have an appointment scheduled for 9 a.m. "I am aware of your purpose here." She rose with a movement that implied a threat, a tall, angular figure in a black suit that likely cost more than Lila's monthly rent. "Follow me. Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless you are addressed by Mr. Morelli. And lower your gaze until he acknowledges you. For your own well-being, do not squander his time." Lila processed the series of commands. Is this an interview or an interrogation? The woman's face remained a stone mask. With Mr. Morelli, the two are often indistinguishable. They proceeded down a corridor lined with art that was either priceless or an elaborate joke. The carpet was so dense that her feet sank into it. From behind closed doors emanated a heavy, pressurized silence, the sound of individuals afraid to make a noise. "Apologies," Lila said, attempting to fill the void. "I didn't catch your name." "I did not offer it." The woman halted before a pair of immense dark wood doors with chrome handles. "This is his office. He is occupied with a call. When the light above the door shifts to green, you may enter, not a moment sooner." "And if the light remains red?" "Then you will persist in waiting." "For how long?" The woman's stare suggested the question was an affront to basic logic. until it becomes green or until Mr. Morelli determines your appointment is nullified, whichever event occurs first. With that, she pivoted, her heels striking the marble like a metronome as she left Lila alone with the oppressive red light. The time was precisely 9 a.m., punctual by any standard, but within this ecosystem she was already deficient. The minutes stretched, the red light a constant, unblinking eye. A voice permeated the door. It was deep, measured, and radiated an authority that had no need for volume. The words were indistinct, but the tone was that of absolute decree. It was neither angry nor gentle. It was the sound of objective truth being delivered as fact. A sharp pain began to build in Lila's feet. The borrowed heels were half a size too small, a hasty substitute for her own, lost to a city great. She adjusted her weight again, the portfolio now feeling like a block of lead. She placed it on the floor, then immediately retrieved it, as if leaving an object on the pristine surface was a punishable act. The light flashed green. Lila gripped the handle and pushed. The massive door was immobile. She pushed with more force, still nothing. It was a pull-style door, a foolish, elementary error. She yanked it open, its momentum throwing her off balance and into the room. Her heel snagged on the thick carpet, and she was pitched forward as if by an unseen hand, her portfolio launching from her grasp. Its contents erupted over the dark floor. Resumes, letters of reference, and financial spreadsheets, scattering like dead leaves. Lila's body then met an unyielding object with a hideously loud crack. A flood of sensations followed. The music of shattering porcelain, the aroma of old books and expensive cologne, and then a sudden, profound silence. She found herself on her hands and knees amid the glittering debris of what was once a vase. It was clearly a museum-grade piece, blue and white, its ancient narrative now reduced to costly fragments. "No," Lila whispered. "This cannot be happening." "Get up!" The voice originated from behind a desk the size of a compact car. It was the same one from the hallway, only sharper now and impossibly, frighteningly calm. Lila scrambled to her feet, her motions awkward on unsteady legs and in confining shoes. She regained her balance only to step on a loose page of her own resume. The slick paper slid like ice. She windmilled her arms, grasping at a bookshelf for stability. Her hand struck a small sculpture, which fell and broke into 2 pieces. "Do not move!" the voice commanded. Lila froze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. In 15 seconds, she had inflicted thousands of dollars in damages. "I am profoundly sorry," she stammered. "I will compensate you for it. I am not sure how, but I will find a way. I can take on a second job. I will... Look at me." Lila complied, raising her eyes from the field of her own making. Dante Morelli was observing her, perfectly still, like a predator analyzing whether a new creature represents a threat or a diversion. He was younger than she anticipated, perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark, severe hair and features that seemed hewn from granite. He wore an immaculate black suit without a tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a manner that felt more menacing than any formal wear. His eyes were a true, fathomless dark that seemed to absorb light. He assessed her, not as a person, but as a complex problem he was solving. "You are Lila Bennett," he stated. It was a declaration, not a query. "Yes," her voice was a mere wisp. I was here for the interview. I am so sorry about the vase." It was a 14th century artifact from the Ming Dynasty. Its value was approximately $80,000. The color vanished from Lila's face as a cold wave of shock enveloped her. I will arrange a payment schedule," It was also a replica. He inclined his head. I stored the authentic piece elsewhere. This office has too much activity for genuine artifacts. She stared, struggling with the cognitive whiplash. So I did not just shatter. You shattered a $1,500 reproduction. A significant and careless loss, but not a catastrophe. He rose, and his stature seemed to compress the room around him. The sculpture you dislodged, however, was authentic. 18th century ivory. You will be compensating me for that? Lila's gaze fell to the new fragments of ruin at her feet. How much is that worth? That is entirely contingent on whether you survive the next 10 minutes. He moved from behind the desk with a predator's measured grace. Tell me, Ms. Bennett, is the destruction of property a regular habit of yours, or am I observing a rare event? This is a particularly terrible day for me, she replied, aware of how weak it sounded. I assure you I am competent, organized, I am... His voice sliced through hers. You are standing in the ruin of porcelain and your professional prospects. He approached her, his nearness revealing a thin scar beside his left eyebrow. Your shoes are ill-fitting, your dress is stained. Hope and a damaged zipper appear to be what holds your portfolio together. Every page is marked by the condensation ring from a glass. A flush of heat bloomed in Lila's cheeks. There are explanations for all of this. Do not articulate them. He knelt, a gesture that leveled his gaze with hers and was more unsettling than his height, and retrieved a resume from the floor. He read it in absolute silence. His mind processed her timeline. A mathematics degree from Columbia, full scholarship, highest distinctions. 3 years as a financial analyst at Moretti and Hecht before its spectacular collapse. His eyes drilled into hers. Why seek an assistant's role with qualifications that eclipse half of my own management team? Because I require employment, Lila stated, her honesty a stark clinical thing, and no firm will engage someone from an organization indicted for fraud, my innocence notwithstanding. You were in their accounting division. Data analysis. I identified the discrepancies. I reported them. The FBI subsequently uncovered far greater crimes, and the company disintegrated. She met his stare with the defiance of someone with nothing left to risk. I performed the correct action, and it cost me everything. Now I am rebuilding, apparently by dismantling your office. A subtle change occurred in Dante's expression. It was not a softening. He seemed incapable of such a thing, but the decisive click of a hypothesis being confirmed. You are the individual who reported the fraud, he stated. Yes, knowing it would obliterate your own position. I reported it because people were on the verge of losing their life savings if I remained silent. Lila felt her voice gain a dangerous tremor of emotion she could not suppress. I never conceived that the entire firm would implode. I believed the issue would be rectified. I was mistaken. Dante rose, her dossier now in his hand. And now you are insolvent, unemployable, and desperate enough to seek me out. I researched your corporation, Lila countered. Model. The Morelli empire encompasses 17 subsidiaries and 6 commercial holdings, defined by a narrative of relentless expansion and immaculate financials. Your public image is flawless. Dante's quiet repetition of publicly carried a subtle, chilling irony. Perhaps it once was. I require a position, Lila insisted. My proficiency is demonstrable. I operate with precision, speed, and a discretion for inquiries outside my purview, a claim contradicted by your interaction with my receptionist. I inquired about her name, a name she withheld, as her role is not social. He moved back toward his desk, his path through the ceramic shards guided by pure muscle memory. In the last 2 years, I have employed 4 assistants. The first vanished after 3 days. The second suffered a mental collapse within a week. The third violated my punctuality rule. The fourth attempted theft. And their fates? The initial 3 secured new employment. The fourth ceased to be a concern. He took his seat, indicating the empty chair opposite him. Be seated. Layla assessed the chair, then the treacherous field of fragments separating them. She navigated the debris with careful steps, avoiding every piece of porcelain before sitting. The chair's discomfort met her expectations. From a drawer, Dante produced a slender file. I will pose 3 questions, and you will provide truthful answers. Any perceived deception will conclude this meeting and extinguish your career prospects in this city. Is that clear? A sudden dryness afflicted Layla's throat. It is. First question. What is the true motive for your presence? As I said, I require employment, certainly, yet you've submitted applications to 43 companies over 6 months. I am aware of this because I authorized a full background inquiry on you yesterday. He reclined slightly. 37 of those sought roles similar to your previous one. 5 were parallel transfers. This is the sole application representing a significant demotion. I repeat, why this firm? Layla centered her breathing. The unvarnished truth or a curated narrative? She was certain he could discern one from the other. Because all other firms view my history and see only incompetence or criminality, she stated. The association with fraud has poisoned my reputation. Your organization, however, is reputed to acquire assets others have discarded. You employ 3 executives from failed corporations and a woman dismissed from 6 prior positions. This implies either an uncommon capacity for pardon or a complete disregard for conventional recruitment protocols. Or perhaps that I prioritize competence over an unblemished past. That is another possibility. Layla held his gaze. My hypothesis is that you evaluate individuals based on their utility, not on the missteps of their former employers. A prolonged silence hung in the air before Dante spoke. Second question, what was the actual cause of Moretti and Hecht's collapse? The investigation into their fraud. That is the official narrative. I want the reality. Layla paused, sensing a snare whose mechanism was hidden. The malfeasance was genuine, she started, choosing her words with care, but it was not the complete picture. Moretti had leveraged enormous debt to fuel expansion. The asset freeze from the investigation made them insolvent. A domino effect ensued. Customers vanished, lenders demanded payment, and the enterprise disintegrated within 3 weeks. The fraud was merely the catalyst for an already combustible situation, and you foresaw this. The remark was an assertion, not a question, yet Layla responded. I identified the emerging pattern 6 months prior to the collapse. I presented my findings to my superiors. They disregarded them. For what reason? I was a 26-year-old woman informing men of considerable seniority that their entire operational framework was defective. They characterized my analysis as alarmist. A corrosive bitterness tinged her voice, a sensation she struggled to suppress. Their assessment was incorrect. Mine was not. Reality was indifferent to their opinion. Dante raised a pen, depressing the clicker once. The noise echoed like a single shot in the silent space. Third question. Should I employ you and you discover a discrepancy in my accounts, how do you proceed? Layla understood this was the crux of the evaluation. I would report it to you personally, she replied, and I would assist in its correction. You would not involve the authorities, only upon your explicit command. Layla inclined forward. I absorbed a critical lesson at Moretti. Circumventing the established hierarchy resolves nothing. It only breeds disorder. My function is to serve your interests, not the FBI's, not the SEC's, but yours alone. Is this loyalty or an adaptable moral compass? It is pragmatism, Layla retorted. A system cannot be reformed from an external position. True change requires trust from within. Dante clicked the pen once more, then again. He placed it on the desk, precisely aligned with his notepad. Your employment begins Monday, he stated, at 0800. The time was exact. Not 8:15, not a moment earlier. 0800. A tight coil of anxiety within Layla began to unwind. I am grateful, I assure you. Your annual compensation is $60,000. Benefits commence after 90 days. Your sole reporting line is to me, which entails longer hours than any other employee and access to sensitive data that carries inherent risk. You will maintain absolute confidentiality regarding my affairs. You will refrain from inquiries beyond your scope, and you will not damage any further property in this office. Understood. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement so stringent that your own counsel would advise against it. You will execute it regardless, as your need for this position outweighs your need for legal safeguards. He rose to his feet. The ivory sculpture you destroyed is valued at $4,000. That sum will be deducted from your first 3 salary payments. The vase was an error on my part. Placing a copy in a main thoroughfare showed poor foresight. That particular debt is absolved. Layla also stood, attempting to mask the surge of relief that swept through her. My thanks, Mr. Moretti. Reserve your gratitude. You have yet to endure a full day here. He walked to the door and opened it. Claire will transmit the necessary contracts. Review them in their entirety. Do not affix your signature until you are certain. Claire, the receptionist, the individual whose name you sought. Of course. Layla knelt to collect her strewn documents, striving to retain some measure of composure. She succeeded in corralling her papers into the portfolio, its damaged zipper requiring both hands to prevent its contents from escaping. At the doorway, Dante's voice arrested her movement. Miss Bennet? She turned. It was neither your credentials nor your palpable desperation that earned you this role, he declared. It was your choice to expose the Moretti fraud, fully aware it would precipitate your own downfall. Such conviction is rare. It is a quality I require in my subordinates. Speechless, Layla gave a single sharp nod of acknowledgement before departing. The weekend became a period of intense, concentrated preparation, a careful construction of a professional armor. She acquired new footwear, austere, practical heels, and 2 additional dresses, each without a single flaw. She meticulously reviewed the non-disclosure agreement from Claire, all 47 pages of it, and affixed her signature. Dante's analysis had been flawless. Her desperation for the role far outstripped any need for legal sanctuary. Monday arrived under a shroud of rain. At 7:45, Layla stood beneath Moretti Tower, her umbrella having already surrendered once to the wind, the structure looming over her like a testament to absolute power. Inside, the lobby was a cold expanse of marble and steel manned by guards who examined her ID with the gravity of men protecting state secrets. She stepped onto the 47th floor at 7:58. Claire was at her post, wearing the same unforgiving expression from their interview. Her eyes flicked from Lila to the clock on her screen. "You have arrived ahead of schedule." I was under the impression that early was considered punctual here. Ahead of schedule is permissible. Punctual is required. Late is unacceptable. Claire pushed a key card and a slim file toward her. "Your workspace is the alcove adjacent to Mr. Moretti's office. Your access is restricted to this level, the executive area on 46, and the document vault on 42. All other floors necessitate his explicit written consent. Your login credentials are in this file. Reset the password without delay. Mr. Morelli is anticipated at 800 hours. He requires coffee, black, no sugar, with a temperature between 180 and 185 degrees, placed on his desk by 8:01, not before, not after. How can I ensure?" Claire indicated a door labeled Executive Break Room. "You will find a thermometer in the drawer next to the coffee system. Utilize it." Holding the file and access card, Layla entered the break area, which resembled less a lounge and more a sanctuary for pristine, high-end equipment. The coffee machine appeared to be of extraterrestrial design. After finding a digital thermometer, she prepared the coffee, confirmed the temperature with clinical precision, and positioned it on Dante's desk precisely at 8:01. His office was unoccupied. Layla placed the cup carefully, maintaining a safe distance from what seemed to be invaluable objects, and returned to her workstation. Her alcove, though compact, was a model of ergonomic efficiency. The monitor offered a sweeping cityscape view, an amenity of considerable expense. A computer, an intricate telephone system, and a pile of urgent files were ready for her. Layla commenced her duties, accessing the network to examine the first file. The document was a shipping manifest for a Morelli subsidiary containing what seemed to be routine logistical data. However, a comparison with the firm's asset records revealed a minor irregularity. A consignment of textiles scheduled for 500 units was recorded as 487. The variance was documented but not justified. Layla retrieved another manifest from the same division for a separate fiscal period, revealing a similar deficit of 13 units. As she started to chart the developing pattern, a voice shattered her focus. "You have been present for 20 minutes, and you are already searching for systemic flaws." Her composure momentarily broke. Framed by the doorway, Dante held the coffee she'd prepared, his face a mask of detached clinical evaluation. Lila offered her rationale. She was reviewing his priority files. His correction was swift. Those files were a 6-month-old assessment, not a priority. He tasted the coffee. 184 degrees, satisfactory. "Did you measure it?" "I measure everything." He moved to her desk, gaze fixed on the screen. "Your findings?" "A slow bleed. Minor. Persistent inventory shortages from Arcadia Textiles, a pattern suggesting either system failure or calculated theft. Which do you suspect?" "A glitch would create chaos," she reasoned. "Not this methodical rhythm." Someone was siphoning assets, banking on the minor thefts being dismissed as accounting errors. Dante placed his cup down, a deliberate motion. "Quantify the financial damage." Lila's calculation was ready. Approximately $32,000 wholesale over the 6-month span. And the culprit? Pinpointing in person, she explained. Needed personnel and shipping data. The profile was a warehouse staffer cleared to alter the logs. You have been here for 20 minutes, Dante observed quietly. My predecessor missed this pattern for 6 months, given the exact same data. Perhaps, Lila countered, she wasn't trained to find anomalies. She was ordered to, he replied, retrieving his coffee. The variable is competence. She lacked it. You possess it. A surge of pride washed over Lila, immediately frozen by suspicion. You were already aware of this. For 8 months, he confirmed. This was a metric for your analytical velocity. That is. Lila censored the word that would seal her fate. Exceptionally meticulous. I do not hire untested assets, nor do I extend unearned trust. He turned toward his office, then stopped. Resolve the Arcadia issue discreetly. The thief remains ignorant until I determine his consequence. What is the protocol I should? Your intellect diagnosed the sickness. It can also devise the cure. The door clicked shut, leaving Lila in silence. She turned to her terminal, summoning personnel files, shipment manifests, and warehouse access records. After 3 hours of forensic data analysis, a name materialized. Marcus Renton, a 6-year warehouse supervisor with total system clearance. The methodology was elegant. Alter shipment counts post-loading but pre-filing, hiding the crime within the data stream. Lila compiled a concise report with the corroborating evidence, placing it on Dante's desk. Upon his return, he reviewed it silently before summoning her. Your level of certainty. Barring an impossibly sophisticated frame, the numbers are irrefutable. Your recommendation? Lila faltered. Dismiss him and involve law enforcement. Justification. He is embezzling from you. He has taken $32,000 in 6 months, about $5,000 per month. Do you know my monthly coffee expenditure for this office? I imagine it exceeds $5,000. Significantly. So I repeat, why is this important? Lila adjusted her perspective. The issue wasn't the monetary loss, it was the contagion. Tolerating it would encourage its proliferation. Better, Dante said, leaning back. Expand on that. If he has a buyer, he has an external contact. This implies a supply chain vulnerability, one that could be leveraged for greater harm. The correct analysis, Dante affirmed, rising. Marcus Renton is insignificant. The structural weakness that enabled him for 8 months is my focus. Repair the structure. My plan. Implement a 3-point verification system, unscheduled cargo inspections, and require dual authorization for manifest changes. Design a process where integrity is the path of least resistance. He moved to the window. Then you will dismiss Renton. No officials, no drama. I will manage the remainder. A chill settled over Lila. What does manage the remainder entail? Dante faced her. It entails avoiding questions whose answers you are not prepared to receive. An argument died on her lips as she recalled the circumstances that led her here. My function is to assist you. I will deploy the new protocols at once. Excellent. He returned to his desk. And Ms. Bennett? Yes. Devote no further thought to Marcus Renton. He is on the verge of becoming a non-issue. Lila exited, struggling to suppress the harrowing theories that flooded her thoughts. The subsequent weeks established a stark rhythm, a pendulum between peak efficiency and a pervasive dread. Lila would arrive at 7:55 to prepare Dante's coffee to its exact temperature. Her duties were a brutal mosaic of routine administration and complex financial analyses designed to test her cognitive and emotional boundaries. Dante's expectations were exacting and absolute. He required not mere completion, but perfect performance within scenarios he constructed. Compelling her to unearth hidden data, or divine his unspoken theories, only to rebuke her for failing to anticipate his thoughts. Still, fleeting instances of validation emerged. A terse nod over her work, which she decoded as his highest compliment. At times, he would solicit her expert opinion and appear to genuinely weigh her response. She occasionally saw him watching her, his expression unreadable, betraying neither favor nor disapproval. The office itself was a pressure-sealed environment. Staff moved like specters, their interactions hushed and furtive. Lila gathered narratives about Dante, ranging from the credible to the legendary. One cast him as a self-made colossus born of strife. Another rumor painted him as the successor to a dynasty founded by a more merciless patriarch. The sole undeniable truth was that defying him meant career obliteration, with whispers of far graver consequences. Lila quarantined these tales, relying on her own capability as a defense. She repaired systemic flaws, optimized workflows, and neutralized problems before they escalated. She started predicting his requirements, interpreting the nuances of his disposition, and mastering his organized turmoil. Then, 6 weeks in, she uncovered an anomaly. It was almost 8 p.m. The floor was deserted. Dante remained in a meeting, allowing Lila to scrutinize flagged expenses. The record seemed mundane. Travel, client entertainment, corporate purchases. Yet one entry created a discordant note. Meridian Holdings had invoiced $127,000 for consulting. Not inherently unusual, but as Lila cross-referenced Meridian's payment records, an obscurity emerged. The funds were channeled to Apex Advisory Group, a company too recent or too minor to appear in any business registry. Further investigation yielded nothing. Apex Advisory Group was a ghost corporation lacking a charter, tax history, or any official footprint. It was unreal. Her pulse quickened. This pointed to either a simple mistake or a deep-seated corruption in the accounts. She retrieved additional files from Meridian. 3 more disbursements to Apex surfaced from the past 6 months, ranging from $100,000 to $150,000. Over $500,000 had vanished into a shell. Meridian's other financials were immaculate. These 4 transfers were like open sores on perfect ledger. Lila was paralyzed before the monitor. Lila perceived the system's pathology with brutal clarity. The funds funneled via Meridian suggested a rogue actor or a more profound corporate malignancy. If Dante, the apex predator, was complicit, her discovery was a fatal liability. Prudence demanded she withdraw, yet an impulse pushed her deeper. She began a forensic audit of Meridian's shipping manifests, its logistics division. A clear pattern of corruption surfaced: falsified inventories, illogical transit routes, and supposedly inactive warehouses showing signs of operation. The label of mere fraud seemed insufficient. An icy fear tightened in her gut. Dante materialized in the doorway, bearing an exhaustion she'd never witnessed. His inquiry, "Discover anything of note?" was the pivotal point upon which her fate rested. This interaction would set the terms of their entire relationship. Deception offered safety, but honesty was a blade that could expose the true figure behind the facade. Lila opted for the blade, rotating her screen toward him, the incriminating data stark in the low light. She presented the information with surgical detachment. Meridian Holdings disbursed over $500,000 in 6 months to a shell corporation. Without banking access, I cannot follow the capital. Dante approached her desk, his face unreadable as he absorbed the information. "And your hypothesis?" he asked, his tone unnervingly placid. My assessment is either internal embezzlement or a money laundering scheme, Lila stated. Alternatively, it's an authorized operation, making me an unforeseen variable. A heavy silence hung in the air before Dante reached over and shut the file. "Go home, Ms. Bennett," he stated, his voice absent of threat, yet taut with immense control. "We will address this tomorrow." Gathering her materials, Layla exited, conscious of his eyes on her until the click of his office door echoed behind her. Sleep offered no refuge that night. She arrived at 7:30 the following morning, bracing for the corporate execution. A deactivated keycard, her network access rescinded. Instead, an unnerving sense of normalcy permeated the building. The lift ascended to the 47th floor. Her computer granted access without incident. A sliver of light emanated from beneath Dante's door. She brewed his coffee, a morning ritual, verifying its temperature twice before rapping on his door at exactly 8:01. Enter. Dante was a figure outlined against the window, apparently absorbed in the sprawling cityscape below. He remained still. "Place it on the desk," he instructed. As Layla pivoted to depart, his voice cut through the silence. "Stay." She went rigid, every nerve fiber alight with alarm. Dante faced her then, the weariness carved into his features, only amplifying the potent danger of his aura. "Present your findings," he commanded. Layla articulated the data, her voice a dispassionate replay of the prior evening's discovery. Anomalous transfers to a shell entity through Meridian, exceeding $500,000 over 6 months. Logistical irregularities imply misuse of warehouse facilities. My analysis suggests either you are directing this unsanctioned activity or you are ignorant of it. If it is the former, I require clarification of my position. Dante approached his desk, sampled the coffee, and replaced the cup with meticulous precision. The very atmosphere in the office seemed charged, each object a projection of his authority. "Sit," he directed, indicating the chair from her initial interview. "What information do you possess regarding my family?" Dante inquired. "Your father founded Morelli Enterprises 30 years prior. Following his death 8 years ago, you assumed control and initiated a significant expansion." "My father did not found a business," Dante corrected, his tone flat and emotionless. "He was bequeathed a kingdom. My grandfather constructed an empire that instilled fear in men. My father was simply his heir. Upon my father's passing, the legacy was divided between my brother and me." A cold sensation traced its way down her spine. "What kind of operations?" "You are astute enough to draw the necessary conclusions. I will not illustrate it for you." "Your family is involved in organized crime." "Is," Dante affirmed, his gaze steady. "Presently. We are, however, navigating a transition. A portion of our portfolio is legitimate. Other parts are being sanitized. Meridian, regrettably, continues to fulfill its original function. You are laundering funds. I am managing a sinful inheritance. There is a distinction." He manipulated a pen, a minor, measured gesture. "After my father's death, 2 options presented themselves. Allow the entire structure to implode, or take control and attempt to build a legitimate entity to safeguard those who rely on me. I chose the latter." "For what reason are you revealing this to me?" "Because your discovery renders you one of 2 things, a vulnerability or an asset. I am affording you the opportunity to choose which you prefer to be." Her mouth felt like sand. "And my choice is to leave?" "What You would execute a binding non-disclosure agreement, accept a substantial severance, and you would be blacklisted in this city. You would be classified as a security liability. That does not constitute a choice. Indeed, Dante conceded. It does not, but it is a consideration you would not have been granted by my predecessors. Lila observed the man who had offered her a sense of purpose when she felt inconsequential. He was presenting her a role within a world that could utterly consume her, or a chance to be instrumental in a perilous, illicit, and profound transformation. What would my function be? She heard her own voice ask. A change in Dante's eyes, not of relief, but something perilously close to it. Your current duties, but on a far greater scale. You will identify the pathology within this organization and assist me in developing the remedy. You will help me legitimize this enterprise before its rotten core destroys us all. That is well beyond an administrative assistant's purview. You have served as my forensic accountant and operational analyst since your first day. I merely withheld the title. And matters like Meridian, you report them to me, exclusively to me, and we, together, will devise a way to remove the cancer without killing the host. I will be transparent with you about this company, but your conscience will remain your own. You must decide if you are committed. Layla thought of past instances where acting honorably had resulted in calamity. At 27, she balanced her stalled career against this colossal risk. I require complete access to all financial documentation, she declared, not merely the sanitized records. To heal this system, I must diagnose the full extent of the disease. Granted. And I require your assurance that legitimacy is the genuine objective, not merely a facade to conceal wrongdoing. Dante rose and moved around the desk, extending his hand. You have my word. In my sphere, that is an unbreakable pact. Layla accepted it. His grip was strong, held for a second too long, cementing a pact that felt far more significant than business. Welcome to the inner circle, Ms. Bennett, he remarked. Endeavor to limit the collateral damage. In the ensuing weeks, Layla discovered Dante's world was a more convoluted web than she had ever imagined. She was granted access to encrypted systems and ledgers that chronicled an organization undergoing a slow, arduous metamorphosis. Some entities were entirely legitimate, functioning precisely as stated. Others were in flux, their revenue streams redirected, affiliations severed, and structures reorganized. And then there were assets like Meridian. Layla's days became a labyrinth of tracing capital, determining what could be salvaged and what required liquidation. It was akin to unraveling a vast knot while an unseen hand continuously added more thread, each pull exposing a fresh complication. To her surprise, Dante was a constant presence. She had anticipated he would direct from his office while she managed the difficult tasks. Instead, he sat with her, reviewing files, deconstructing issues as a peer, not a boss. This Brooklyn warehouse, Layla noted one afternoon, indicating a file on her monitor. It is designated as a Meridian storage site, but its utility consumption is inconsistent. The power draw is far too high for a standard warehouse. Dante leaned in for a closer view. His proximity was such that she could detect his cologne, a refined, costly fragrance with a French name she dared not pronounce. What is your assessment of its use? He questioned. It either houses off-the-books machinery, or it's been repurposed for a power-intensive activity. A cultivation facility, perhaps? Or some type of manufacturing. Neither. It's a casino, poker, sports wagering, and some ancillary lending. Dante leaned back, My uncle's operation. He's managed it for 2 decades. Your uncle? My father's brother. He has no interest in legitimacy, and he wields sufficient influence in the family that deposing him would ignite a conflict I cannot presently win. Lila accessed additional documents. What is the annual revenue from this location? Approximately 2 million, almost entirely unreported. And you permit its continuation? I am selecting my battles. The gambling operation is minor enough to evade federal scrutiny. My uncle keeps it contained, avoids expansion, and is not avaricious. It represents a risk, but a calculated one. I have more significant challenges to address first. For instance, Dante rose and walked to the window, a characteristic action when he was processing thoughts, as if the cityscape helped him organize his mind. For instance, my father forged agreements with men who are indifferent to his absence, or suppliers who pressure me to distribute products I intend to cease handling, or the reality that terminating certain arrangements would make me such a target that operating a legitimate business would be rendered impossible. What sort of products? He turned toward her. Are you certain you want to know? Layla considered this. Yes. Primarily stolen merchandise, high-value electronics, jewelry, fine art, items that reach the port and vanish before being logged by customs. My father cultivated relationships with the thieves, and they anticipate that business will persist. Does it? Currently, I have been gradually diminishing our involvement, acquiring less, moving less, manufacturing distance, but it is a subtle and hazardous undertaking. These are not individuals who react favorably to being cut off. Layla returned her focus to her monitor, calling up shipping manifests. Detail the operations for me. I will see if I can devise a way to make the downturn appear to be a consequence of market dynamics. Make it appear to be a business necessity, not my decree. Dante returned to her workstation, and over the next 2 hours, he guided her through the illicit dimensions of his enterprise. He spoke factually, with neither shame nor rationalization, simply outlining the reality he inherited and was now attempting to deconstruct. When he concluded, Layla's head throbbed, and she at last understood the deep weariness he had shown when she first reported Meridian's issues. This will require years, she stated. I am cognizant of that, and there is no assurance of success. Any of these alliances could fracture and cause the entire structure to collapse. I know that as well. Dante studied her. Does this alter your decision? Regarding my assistance, Layla shook her head. No, but our approach must be more sophisticated. We need to accelerate in certain sectors and decelerate in others. We must establish priorities according to risk, not profitability. What would you place on your priority list? Layla initiated a new spreadsheet and started to construct a strategic outline. First, any operation involving violence or exploitation is terminated, regardless of its earnings. We cannot claim legitimacy while profiting from human misery. Second, our ventures under police surveillance. They are ticking bombs. Third, high-risk, low-return operations that are not worth their potential consequences. The extraneous elements will be methodically excised, supplanted by legitimate enterprises as our reformation proceeds. Dante observed her as she orchestrated this transition, his expression a mask of neutrality when she met his gaze. What? She inquired. You have just been inducted into the world of organized crime, and your inaugural act is to architect its ethical dissolution. You expressed a desire for legitimacy. That is a pursuit founded on principle. A majority of individuals in your position would seek avenues of personal enrichment from this. I am not a constituent of that majority. Lila secured the document. And if I were motivated by illicit profit, the malfeasance at Morrison would have remained my secret. No, Dante conceded softly, that you would not have. He departed her office, yet by the following morning, Layla found her compensation had grown by $30,000, and her designation was now Director of Financial Operations. The work enveloped her with an intensity she had not known since her formative years at Morrison. Here, she was untangling enigmas where the consequences were palpable, serving a man who regarded her as a contemporary, not a subordinate. The hours were punishing. 12 to 14-hour spans became the new norm, yet she voiced no complaint. She was operating within her calling. This was her design. And Dante, for all his guarded and insular demeanor, was evolving into something beyond an employer. She perceived it in minute gestures, like the coffee he would present when he sensed she had been immersed in ledgers for too long, or in the way he would solicit her judgment on matters beyond their work. Literature, compositions, the fervor surrounding a new establishment on Fifth Avenue. Or how he might, on occasion, simply occupy a chair in her office, laboring in silence, as though drawing comfort from her mere presence. She witnessed it in his gaze when he presumed she was oblivious, a look that blended inquiry with an emotion akin to solicitude. 3 months into her tenure, while Layla was engrossed in a complex shipping route analysis late one evening, Dante materialized in her doorway, holding 2 tumblers and a bottle of whiskey valued at more than her first automobile. "It is time for a respite," he stated. "I am nearly finished with this." "You have been nearly finished for the past 3 hours. It is time." Layla preserved her file and took the glass. The whiskey was fluid and warm, carrying notes of smoke and honey. "To what are we drinking?" she queried. "To advancement. We concluded the first top priority objective today, the port-import operation. That was not slated until the coming month. I advanced the schedule. You were correct. The exposure was too significant." Dante occupied the chair opposite her desk. The involved parties were displeased, but they will acclimate. To what degree were they displeased? Displeased to the extent that I have assigned you a security detail for the next 2 weeks. Layla placed her glass down. I beg your pardon. The individuals we just neutralized are aware you are the analyst who flagged them as a liability. They will not attempt anything irrational, but I will not wager on your well-being. Did it not occur to you to broach this subject with me beforehand? I am broaching it with you at present. After the fact. Precisely. Dante sipped from his glass. Because had I inquired, you would have asserted you required no protection. I would have dissented, and we would have squandered time on a debate that concludes with me taking this action regardless. That is... Layla paused, for he was correct, a truth they both acknowledged. I do not appreciate being managed as though I am defenseless. I am managing you as though you are indispensable to this organization, and your loss is an unacceptable risk. There is a distinction. Is there? Dante shifted forward. I have employed 4 executive assistants in 2 years. 3 resigned, incapable of managing the demands, and 1 attempted to embezzle from me. You have been here 3 months and have unearthed systemic issues that have plagued this organization for years. You have devised strategies my own financial team could not conceive. You have contested my judgments and have been proven right more often than you have been wrong. So yes, there is a distinction. I require your presence here, which means I require you to be unharmed. Lila retrieved her glass, needing the tactile distraction. I acknowledge the sentiment, but I still favor being included in such decisions. Duly noted. The corner of Dante's mouth lifted, the nearest approximation he offered to a genuine smile. I will endeavor to recall that, should your life again be in peril. Ensure that you do. A functional quietude descended between them, a void filled by the character of expensive spirits as they surveyed the cityscape from her office. May I inquire about something? Lila ventured. That is contingent upon the question. You spoke of a brother who was to share this enterprise. What became of him? The musculature of his face tightened. He is gone. I am sorry. I did not intend to. He was killed 5 years ago, a loss sustained in a territorial conflict with a rival faction. Dante's focus dropped to his glass. He was meant to oversee the legitimate side. He possessed a talent for people, for negotiations, for forging alliances not predicated on intimidation. My function was the obverse of that coin, the enforcement, the operations, the duties that called for a man who could execute difficult choices without hesitation. But his passing left you responsible for both domains. His death meant I inherited a kingdom I was only 50% prepared to command. The part that bleeds, I comprehended. The part that builds rather than merely maintains. That was his art, not my own. Lila processed this revelation. She envisioned him, Dante, a figure of such scrupulous control and precision, attempting to erect a legitimate world with the instruments of a violent one. You are succeeding more than you realize, she offered. Am I? You retained me. You are integrating analysis instead of making determinations based solely on power and menace. You are dismantling the components that inflict damage, even when they are lucrative. That is not the mark of a man failing to construct something clean. It is the mark of a man who is genuinely making the attempt. Dante regarded her for a long, silent interval. You possess more faith in me than I do in myself. Then I am present to serve as the counterbalance. A specter of a smile graced his lips for a mere second. Then his phone vibrated, fracturing the delicate peace. He assessed the screen, and the information displayed erased his expression, leaving only stone. I must depart, he said, rising. Do not remain too late. Where are you going? To meet with someone who is discontented with our recent operational adjustments. He placed his glass on her desk. My security team will be positioned downstairs upon your departure. Do not endeavor to evade them. The notion had not even occurred to me. Lila feigned, a fabrication they both recognized. After his exit, she lingered, finished her whiskey, and tried to avoid fixating on him walking into peril while she remained secure in a tower of glass. The subsequent morning, he presented at the office with abraded knuckles and no explanation. Lila did not inquire, but she registered the rigid quality of his movements, how he favored his left hand over his right to lift a coffee mug, the faint contusion along his jaw, She also sensed a new undercurrent in the office discourse. The apprehension had always been a constant, but this was of a different quality. It was deferential, as if some unspoken challenge to the established order had been met with a brutal resolution. "What transpired last night?" she asked Claire while Dante was in a conference. "Mr. Morelli delivered a lesson regarding the limits of his patience," Claire stated, her attention locked on her monitor. "That is the extent of what you need to understand." "Was anyone grievously injured?" Define grievously." "Claire." The older woman finally raised her eyes, a sliver of compassion within them. "You are beginning to harbor feelings for him. That is an error." "I am not." "You are. I have observed 4 other assistants in this position. The first 3 were petrified of him. The 4th believed she could manipulate him. You are the first who perceives a man." Claire's tone was a quiet admonition. "He is a man, but he is also a predator. Never forget which aspect carries greater influence here." Lila returned to her desk, attempting to focus, but Claire's words resonated. That evening, after the majority had departed, Dante summoned her to his office. "We must address Meridian," he said. Lila took a seat. "What is the issue?" "I am dissolving it, the whole of it. The entire operation is overly exposed for insufficient legitimate return. Its holdings will be liquidated and absorbed into the cleaner facets of the business. That will create a void in your distribution network. I will bridge it with clean contracts. It will require more time, but it is a superior strategy than attempting to sanitize Meridian incrementally." "And the projected timeline?" "End of the month. That affords you 3 weeks to chart the redistribution of its legitimate functions and sever all other connections." "But," he slid a folder across the polished surface, "everything you require is contained within. Personnel records, vendor agreements, property leases. Your task is to devise a method to terminate them all without inciting litigation or a conflict." Layla opened it, the initial page displaying a convoluted morass of informal understandings and shadow pacts that would be a catastrophe to unravel cleanly. "This is a task exceeding a 3-week scope," she declared. "I am aware. Accomplish what you can. I will manage the remainder." "When you say you will manage the remainder," "I mean I will manage it through methods you do not need to be privy to." Dante's tone was inflexible. "I know you wish for involvement in all matters, but certain doors in this business are closed to you for your own safety and for mine." Layla felt the counter-argument form, but saw in his expression that it was futile. The decree was made, and like most of his decrees, it was immutable. "Understood," she said. "But if this veers off course, because I lacked complete information, the responsibility is yours." Noted. She took the file, and for the following 2 weeks, she became immersed in the problem of deconstructing Meridian. Certain tasks were straightforward, such as contracts with explicit termination clauses or accounts that could be settled. Others demanded a creator's touch, identifying legal loopholes, proposing sums precisely calibrated to sidestep litigation, and constructing immaculate paper trails. Her nights stretched on, ending only with the arrival of the janitors. Dante kept a similar schedule, often materializing at her doorway around 9 or 10 with a meal. Their work continuing in a silent, shared gravity. On the final evening before the Meridian closure, he appeared, wearing a strain she had never witnessed. "We have an issue," he stated, the words planting a cold seed of dread in Lila's core. "What kind of issue?" "The kind where our timetable was breached, forcing an opponent's hand." He approached her desk. "I require you to leave, now." "What is happening?" "Something outside your purview. Go home, secure your doors, and do not accept calls from any number you don't know." "Dante." "This is an order, Lila." Hearing her first name from him was so unusual, it served as a warning siren. Certain parties are displeased with our maneuvers, and they have selected tonight to express their grievances. I need you in a safe location while I manage it. I can assist. You cannot. Not in this matter. He drew his phone, composing a swift message. Security is waiting downstairs. They will escort you home and remain posted at your building until I clear them. For how long? For as long as required. He met her gaze, and in that instant, she perceived something akin to fear. A vision so foreign it unnerved her more than anything. Please for once simply comply without argument. Lila collected her belongings and was driven home by security. Sleep was an impossibility. She remained on her couch, phone gripped tightly, awaiting a summons that never arrived. At 2 a.m, she was still awake, staring into the dark screen, warding off the most terrible scenarios. At 2:47, it chimed. An unrecognized number. She took the call. "Miss Bennett." The voice was a man's, a stranger with an unplaceable accent. "Your efforts have created difficulties for some very powerful interests." "Who is this?" "An individual who believes you should rethink your professional allegiances. Mr. Morelli's agenda is disrupting a highly sensitive equilibrium. Your assistance makes you a component of the problem." Layla's grip on the phone intensified. "And if you have a grievance with our actions, address it with Dante." "Oh, we are. In fact, we are doing so now. We simply wished for you to grasp that your participation carries consequences. Consider if your career is worth its potential cost." The connection severed. Layla was paralyzed for a moment before dialing Dante. The call went directly to his voicemail. She tried once more, with the same outcome. She phoned the security detail supposedly stationed outside. It rang unanswered. Seizing her keys and phone, she fled. The warehouse occupied a district that time had forsaken, defined by broken roads, corroded fences, and the vacant, hollowed-out gaze of derelict structures. In the passenger seat of Dante's car, a black sedan that exuded more menace than any sports car, Layla fought to regulate her breathing. "This is a strategic error," she repeated for the third time since they had departed her office. With a terse nod, Dante's focus locked onto the crumbling 3-story edifice before them. The confrontation, merely 3 hours prior, had been an exercise in absolute authority. He had presented his decision to Lila, his subordinate, as a final verdict, making any debate pointless. The journey to the Meridian warehouse was framed not as a choice, but as an inescapable conclusion. Her acquiescence was a meticulously engineered surrender, founded on her fear of the unknown, the telltale sign of a newly cemented trauma bond. The site's uncanny resemblance to a filmic abattoir ignited a primal fear in Lila, compelling her to question her compliance. She appealed for reason. Dante offered a single, dismissive word in return. He then recited a creed of codependence. Stay near, remain unheard, and disappear should danger emerge. His curt repetition of the escape protocol etched the hierarchy of power into the air. Lila's obedience, a reflex honed by the palpable threat of their surroundings. was a foregone conclusion. Dante moved into the structure with a disquieting ease. Within, the warehouse was a crypt of rust and neglect. The pale, jaundiced light from overhead made each footfall echo with a sense of foreboding. A man, Gerald, flinched at the unannounced appearance of Mr. Morelli. Dante's voice was disarmingly warm, a jarring contrast that sent a wave of apprehension through Lila. He introduced his assistant, noting her expertise in forensic accounting. Gerald's smile was a fragile facade, unable to conceal the alarm in his eyes. The accountant, Bennett, had uncovered spectral entries in the financial records, all tracing back to a shell entity called Apex Advisory. When confronted, Gerald recognized the name, brushing it off as a logistics firm. Dante allowed the fabrication to linger before revealing that Apex Advisory was an invention, presenting two ruinous possibilities. Funds were being sent to a ghost, or they were being laundered. Color vanished from Gerald's face, a clear sign of his cracking composure as his voice abandoned him. Dante then stated his conditions, requiring a complete account of the money's destination and the warehouse's true purpose. As Gerald hesitated, Dante's hand struck the desk, a sharp report of violence that made both Gerald and Lila recoil. The man went quiet. Dante disclosed he had been aware of the deception for some time. The interrogation was merely to identify its master. Under this crushing weight, Gerald's resolve collapsed. The story emerged, naming Victor Rains as the mastermind who initiated contact 6 months prior. The arrangement was clean: transport an illicit product through the system for a 20% share of the revenue. Gerald claimed ignorance of the actual cargo, asserting he only followed directives on shipping and payment destinations. Dante's expression was stone, but the silent echo of Victor Rains's name was a tectonic shift in his mind, linking this treachery to an older conflict. A tremor seized Gerald's hands as he navigated the computer, his body broadcasting his fear. The monitor displayed 3 addresses in the Port District, which he feebly explained were for temporary storage. Dante observed the screen, his jaw clenching with rage as he identified them as the homes of families. Gerald could only concede his lapse in judgment was a profound error. Dante verified 23 unauthorized shipments had been processed. He then instructed Lila to document everything on the screen with her phone. As Layla's phone served as the silent archivist, a shaken Gerald asked about his fate. Dante presented the grim calculus: name every collaborator, then resign and vanish completely. The alternative, he clarified, was being surrendered to Victor Rains, a destiny Dante described with clinical precision as a certain death sentence. He was leveraging Rains's violent reputation as a tool for his own objectives. Gerald's face went from pale to ashen. Gerald whispered his fear of being murdered, and Dante affirmed it with the cool objectivity of a physician. The resignation he articulated was the sole avenue for survival, setting a deadline for the following morning. Once Layla had secured the evidence, they left. In the car's oppressive quiet, Layla finally inquired about Victor Rains. Dante defined him not as a person but as a liability, a former instrument that had turned on its wielder, his tone utterly devoid of feeling. Dante continued, portraying Rains as a fool who thought he could infect Dante's enterprise without repercussion. When Layla suggested the illicit trade was narcotics, Dante expanded the grim scope to armaments or even human trafficking, remarking that Victor's sole expertise was profit. The leather of the steering wheel strained under the force of Dante's grip. He defined the problem in terms of pure legal exposure. If the authorities discovered the cargo, the blade of the law would fall upon his own neck. the suggestion of involving the police was met with Dante's sharp, disdainful rejection. His logic revealed a profound narcissism, a refusal to be held accountable by any authority but his own. He spoke of owner's liability, the legal framework Victor was exploiting as a defense. If Victor were caught, he would ensure Dante was implicated alongside him. Lila's query about their next move signified her final acquiescence to his world. Dante's reply was a vow of preemptive, fatal action. Dante's soft query, "How?" was the moment Miss Bennet was drafted from spectator to participant. Back in the office, after 11, Dante poured a whiskey, the amber fluid a practiced ritual of composure. He offered a glass to Lila. She declined. He did not insist, instead gesturing for her to display the captured data on the monitor. The analysis commenced, the addresses from her phone burning like sigils as Dante observed. Dante immediately identified the port sites as logistical hubs, where larger consignments were broken down for street-level sale. The residential locations, he deduced, served as a veil of domesticity, exploiting neighbors too intimidated to report anything. He attempted to draw a boundary, declaring he would manage the subsequent actions while she was to disengage. Lila's swift objection was the first sign of her defiance against his authority. Dante intensified his argument, crafting a portrait of Victor Reigns as a fiend of intellect, method, and sadism, a psychological maneuver meant to frighten her into submission. He asserted he had personnel for such tasks, dismissing her capabilities as if she were a novice. His smile was no longer a disguise. It was a view of the predator within, authentically menacing. He issued a challenge, asking if her spirit could endure the kind of brutality that was about to be unleashed. Dante initiated a dispassionate psychological audit, probing Lila's resilience in a world where violence was the prevailing syntax. He spoke of the bleeding moral lines within their sphere. A tremor of understanding passed through Lila. She requested specifics. He delineated her function as purely analytical, not operational, then ordered her disengagement. Her soft inquiry into his motives received a promise laced with chilling ambiguity. Lila's reply was a silent declaration of war between her own ethics and his decree. He asserted his methods were his own concern. Her involvement, he decreed, concluded with her analysis. She was thus absolved and cut loose. He then presented an ultimatum, a trap involving the authorities to test her loyalty. For 2 months, she had observed his flawless orchestration, realizing his command was a directive to shield herself from the impending conflict. She vowed not to alert anyone. He reiterated his order. Her assent was a lie. She retreated to an apartment, donned the guise of a shadow, and drove to the address, a location that matched her mental image perfectly. The structure stood as a 4-story skeleton, bearing the scars of past incursions. She settled into her watch. An hour of stillness was interrupted by the appearance of a van. 2 figures emerged, their movements a well-rehearsed cadence as they moved several medium-sized containers into the building's derelict entrance. Lila's lens absorbed the entire sequence, memorializing their features and the vehicle's registration. After 20 minutes, the van receded. Returning the street to its funereal quiet, Lila reached an existential crossroads, contrasting the prudence of reporting her findings with the recklessness of pursuing her unsanctioned investigation. The rational choice was obvious. She chose the alternative. The building's side access was barred, but the main door was a compromised barrier. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the miasma of decay and scavenged existence. She chose the stairs, ignoring the lifeless elevator. On the second floor, the muffled sounds of occupancy behind doors created a deceptive veneer of the mundane. She climbed to the 3rd level, a vacuum that smelled of mildew and rot. Her progression was a clinic in silent navigation. A new, high-grade security lock made apartment 3F an anomaly. Pressing her ear to the door revealed only a suffocating silence. As she moved to withdraw, the door swung open, framing a massive man whose face was a map of a violent life. His eyes narrowed, instantly identifying her as an intruder. Lila presented a fabricated narrative, a quest for a friend named Sarah. He disputed the fiction, his voice a low rumble, before stating no one by that name resided there. As the enforcer advanced, a visceral instinct to flee screamed within Layla's psyche. A second younger man appeared, obstructing her exit while producing a knife with fluid menace. He posed a question she failed to register. Her attempts at de-escalation were futile. The first man's hand closed on her arm like a steel clamp. He commanded her inside. Her resistance was met with overwhelming pressure until her limb went numb. Subdued, she was propelled into the maw of apartment 3F, her silent scream swallowed by the darkness. The apartment was a hollowed-out space filled with stacked boxes from the delivery. Her primary captor commenced his interrogation, demanding to know her employer. Her steadfast denials were answered with a jarring strike to the head that made the world tilt. Her phone skittered across the concrete and was retrieved by the younger man who uncovered the photographs. The question was repeated. Her mind fractured, sifting through hopeless possibilities. Knowing the truth of working alone would be an unbelievable tale. Believing a police affiliation was a death sentence, she played her final gambit. Dante Morelli. The name resonated in the charged air, an incantation that halted them both. The interrogator demanded she affirm it. She complied, constructing a fiction about a routine check-in, a desperate play for survival. Following a tense, nonverbal conference, the leader placed a call, his speech sharp and concise. Someone on Morelli's payroll, possessing photos and claiming he knows her location. He terminated the call, informing Layla of her new status as a prisoner. Her appeal for release was met with stony silence. He forced her into a chair, clarifying that her sole value and the reason she still drew breath was her connection to her employer. For 20 minutes, she sat under watchful eyes. A third individual then arrived, a man whose cold professionalism made the others look like amateurs. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a disturbingly serene face that betrayed no emotion. The man's suit bespoke a quiet fortune. This had to be Victor Raines. Victor's voice, refined and articulate, struck a dissonant note in the grimy chamber. He labeled her a trivial complication. She made a desperate overture for her own freedom, a suggestion he swatted away as naive. In his calculus, she was either an asset to be leveraged or a liability to be erased. He would determine which. Layla attempted to shrink to become a mere functionary. Victor derided her effort, remarking that Dante Morelli exclusively collects valuable instruments. He demanded to understand her utility. A cold film of sweat slicked her skin as she confessed her expertise in data analysis. Victor acknowledged she was the one who had unearthed the Apex Advisory transactions, a revelation she knew had marked her for Dante. He then probed the nature of Dante's temper. Learning of his fury, Victor framed his rival's pursuit of legitimacy as a contemptible flaw. A faint smile graced Victor's lips, more unnerving than his impassive mask. He inquired what she understood of their shared history before spinning his own narrative of their origins. He was the silent partner, he professed, the one who salvaged Dante's collapsing enterprise and built their dominion for which he was promised an equal share of power. Layla understood instinctively that the pact had been broken. Victor sneered that Dante's foolish ambition to go clean was the cause, a craven refusal to acknowledge the blood that irrigated their kingdom. Lila's expression remained a carefully constructed void. She asked what he desired. His objective, he stated, was to demolish Dante's manufactured respectability, to reveal him as a hypocrite whose new empire was built on a foundation of terror and buried secrets, citing forgotten casualties and the death of Marco Morelli. Having sown these toxic seeds, Victor's demeanor changed. Your presence here is indefinite. A profound, instinctual dread took root in her. She contended her death would trace back to him. Victor merely chuckled, illuminating the vast chasm between Dante's suspicion and undeniable proof. He boasted his purpose would be achieved long before Dante could assemble the evidence. Victor issued the order for her imprisonment, adding with a chilling twist of irony, "Ensure her comfort." The original captor seized her arm once more. All fight had been drained from her as she was escorted to a compact, unlit room furnished with only a soiled mattress and a bucket. The bolt slid into place, imprisoning her in total blackness. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed, attempting to reassemble the fragments of her broken reality. Lila was now spectral, interred, and completely isolated. Her whereabouts, an unknown variable. Dante presumed her safety, a lethal misjudgment, while the orchestrator, Victor Reigns, considered her elimination an inevitability once her tactical value was spent. Her focus shifted inward, her thoughts becoming toxic with self-recrimination, a textbook trauma reaction, attributing her predicament to her own hubris. Her hand started a frantic survey of the cell, a blind quest for an exit that did not exist. The enclosure was flawless. Sheer walls, a door secured externally, and a sealed window. A bucket in the corner offered no recourse. A second sweep of the void confirmed it contained nothing but the mattress. She suppressed the encroaching wave of panic, regulating her breathing into slow, measured cycles. Victor's reference to a shipment was her only thread of hope. A singular event that might introduce a flaw into her prison, a lone opportunity to alter her destiny. Time became meaningless in the sensory vacuum. Then, stimuli, muffled speech, footsteps, the drag of crates, preceded the metallic report of the lock. Light saturated the room, a painful assault. A figure stood silhouetted, its voice a low command. "It's time." Lila rose, her vision struggling to penetrate the glare beyond the guard. The opposition's numbers had swelled to 5, possibly 6 men. Each one regarded her with a cold, operational focus, as if assessing a target for neutralization. Her query of "where?" was met with a curt answer. "The waterfront. Victor wants this handled cleanly." That same brutal grip found her arm again, pulling her into the main room. The area had been sanitized, devoid of all furniture and containers. It was now a barren, sterile theater. They pushed her into the night, into a frigid air saturated with salt, refuse, and the nearby river. A vehicle was waiting. It was a black sedan with opaque windows. The rear door opened and Dante emerged. His eyes moved over Lila, her captor, and settled on Victor Reigns, who observed from the building's entrance with an air of smug accomplishment. "Release her," Dante said, his tone low and charged with menace. "I think not." Victor ambled forward. "You understand? She has value now. She is evidence you were monitoring me, evidence you violated our agreement." "We have no agreement. Not for 3 years." "We have a principle. My domain remains distinct from yours, and she trespassed. She is not one of my operatives. She is your asset, your responsibility, Victor countered, his smile becoming predatory. So this is the arrangement. You walk away. You cease your inquiry into Meridian. You stop excavating my affairs, and she will be unharmed. It is that straightforward. Dante's expression was a mask, but his posture altered, a minute tightening of his frame. If you harm her, no place on earth will conceal you. A significant threat from a man outnumbered 6-1. Do you believe I came unprepared? A fissure appeared in Victor's confidence. He looked past Dante, probing the darkness for threats he could not perceive. And in that moment, the scene erupted. The initial sound was not a bang, but a definitive crack, the punctuation of a hidden rifle. The man restraining Lila convulsed, a puppet whose strings were suddenly cut, and he collapsed. Instinct drove her not away, but toward Dante, the only stable point in a disintegrating world. He drew her in, and a pistol bloomed in his hand, its appearance a violation of the reality she knew. The quiet professional was now a bulwark against a storm of lead, a paradox that threatened her equilibrium. Victor's men scattered, seeking refuge as the street transformed into a brutal abattoir, a reality starkly divorced from cinematic fiction. The air itself seemed to tear under the onslaught of gunfire, the hard rhythm of impacts on metal, the high-pitched shriek of fragmenting glass. "Stay down," Dante commanded, his voice a nucleus of profound calm within the chaos. Lila pressed herself behind the sedan, a desperate attempt to shrink from the sensory assault. Shapes materialized from the surrounding gloom, methodically flanking Victor's men with the economy of a planned assault. Victor had receded behind a concrete column, his commands devoured by the symphony of conflict. One of his followers attempted to flee and was immediately erased by an unseen marksman. Another man buckled, his leg disintegrating beneath him. Dante's weapon spoke twice, terse, declarative reports, and a scream was born and then extinguished. The vacuum of silence that followed felt more violent than the noise, leaving only a ringing hum and the acrid perfume of burnt propellant. From her vantage point, she saw Dante as a statue of lethal intent, weapon held ready. He assessed the scene with the dispassionate gaze of a grandmaster reviewing the board after a critical exchange. 4 of Victor's crew were down, 2 were inert, 2 more were living expressions of agony. The final pair had cast their weapons aside. Victor remained a phantom in the shadows. "Show yourself!" Dante's voice sliced through the stillness. "Or my associates will extract you. I assure you this is the preferable method." A taut moment stretched. Then Victor stepped out, hands raised partway, his expression a carefully constructed mask of composure. "A remarkable display, Dante. I appear to have miscalculated your capacity for such measures. A terminal misjudgment." Dante advanced, his aim a fixed point. "Kneel." "I don't think." "On your knees, Victor, or I will put you there." A nerve pulsed in Victor's jaw, but he sank down, the fine cloth of his suit meeting the grime of the pavement. The mask fractured, exposing the pure, unadulterated animosity beneath. Dante halted just beyond his reach. "You committed 3 errors tonight. First, you believed I was unaware of the decay you nurtured in my own house. Second, you presumed my indifference. Third, you thought you could endanger someone under my wardship and escape a balancing of the accounts." "She was an infiltrator in my business." The lie was calculated, delivered with cold poise. "I positioned her there. She was a diagnostic tool, intended to map the scale of your folly and to authorize the coming response." Victor's eyes narrowed. And what is that? That is entirely contingent on you. Dante gestured to one of his men who produced zip ties. You will provide a complete intelligence profile, every site, every consignment, every name on your ledger. Then you will liquidate this network and vanish from this city. You are delusional if you think. Dante crouched, his eyes now level with Victor's. Do you recall Marco? A profound stillness settled over Victor. My brother. Dante's voice was a low, toxic whisper. Gone 5 years. The official narrative was a vehicle collision. Brake malfunction, a misfortune. A pause, heavy with unspoken history. Except it was no accident, was it, Victor? I have no knowledge of what. Do not. The word was a razor's edge. I have dedicated 5 years to proving what my soul already knew. You orchestrated Marco's death because he uncovered the anomalies in your accounts. You feared he would present his findings to me. You wagered that my grief would obscure my reason. The color drained from Victor's face. Dante, you must understand. Oh, I understand with perfect clarity. You extinguished my bloodline. You leveraged my inheritance to construct your own criminal enterprise. And tonight, you targeted someone for whom I hold a degree of responsibility. Dante straightened to his full stature. So, this is the procedure. You will offer unconditional compliance. You will surrender every fragment of data required to dismantle your infrastructure. In return, I will grant you just enough time to flee before I publicize your existence. And if I decline? Dante cycled the slide on his pistol, the mechanical sound of a round chambering amplifying the silence. Then we bypass the intermediate steps, and I conclude this now. Lila observed from the periphery, her heart pounding as the new paradigm settled like stone. Marco's end was an execution, a truth Dante had guarded for half a decade. Her entire conception of Dante Morelli fractured and recrystallized, the hazy image snapping into a terrifyingly sharp definition. Victor gazed up at Dante, and some internal pillar within him audibly cracked. Fine. You require information? I will provide it, but not here. You will provide it precisely where I designate. Dante signaled his men. Escort him to the facility. Miss Bennet and I will follow. 2 men hoisted Victor to his feet, propelling him toward a newly arrived van. His injured men were being moved into a separate vehicle. The 2 who surrendered were being processed with grim, procedural calm. Dante turned his attention to Lila. Are you injured? She shook her head, unable to form words. Are you able to walk? Yes. Adequate. Enter the car. Layla complied, her movements automated as she settled into the sedan. Dante took the seat beside her as an unfamiliar man assumed the driver's role, pulling away from the scene with the detached calm of a routine extraction, not a flight from a firefight. The facility? Layla finally asked after several blocks. What is it? It is a sterile location for discussion. You are going to interrogate him. That is the objective. Dante, if you injure him, harm is a necessary component. Dante's gaze was like chips of granite. Victor is the reason Marco is dead. He has been draining my organization for months, and tonight he intended to kill you. So yes, harm is the goal. You can either come to terms with that truth or spend this journey suggesting alternatives that I will disregard. Layla's throat constricted. There must be another option. The police? The FBI? An entity that would place me under the same scrutiny as him? one that would excavate the foundations of every structure I have built, an agency that would leverage this to demolish my entire world. Dante's tone was even but carried an edge like sharpened steel. I have told you before, Lila. The law does not shield men like me. It preys on us. Victor knew this. It was the source of his confidence. Apprehending him ensures my own exposure. But if you kill him... I never said I would kill him. I said I would harm him. There exists a significant difference. The clarification offered Lila no solace, but she became silent. Debate was futile. She had entered this domain of her own volition. She had disregarded Dante's explicit command to maintain her distance. Now she was merely an observer of her consequences. The facility was a warehouse in a district that appeared to have been forsaken for decades. The interior was exactly as Lila had envisioned. Stark concrete, towering steel racks, minimalist furniture, and illumination that threw long, distorted shadows. Victor was present, secured to a chair in the center of the immense chamber. He seemed diminished, his authority stripped away, leaving only the man. Dante entered, removed his coat, and rolled up his sleeves as if preparing for manual labor. An associate presented him with a folder. This, Dante began, opening it, is what I already possess regarding your side venture. 23 unsanctioned shipments through Meridian in 6 months. 3 distribution hubs near the port. Over $600,000 laundered through shell corporations. What I am missing is the provenance of your product, the identities of your clients, and the complete scale of your network. And you believe I will simply provide that? Victor's voice was defiant, but Lila detected the tremor of fear beneath it. I am certain you will, as the alternative is considerably less appealing. Dante positioned a chair to face Victor. This is my proposal. Your unequivocal cooperation, and in exchange, you receive a 12-hour head start before I inform certain other factions that you have been encroaching on their territory. It is sufficient time for you to run, to vanish, to begin anew elsewhere, but only after you surrender everything. And the alternative? In that scenario, I will ensure every major criminal organization in this city learns you have been skimming their supply lines while operating under the protection of my name. Your life expectancy will decrease to 48 hours, and I will be moderately inconvenienced by the resulting disorder I must resolve. Victor's expression was a tableau of conflicting emotions. Rage, assessment, terror, and finally the slow-acting poison of defeat. You're bluffing. Am I? Dante leaned back. You have observed me, Victor. You are aware I do not make assurances I cannot fulfill. Therefore, choose. Assist me in cleanly cauterizing this issue, or expire with the knowledge that your sole legacy was complicating my life for a few months. The silence in the warehouse became oppressive. Standing near the entrance, Lila felt she had crossed into a parallel reality governed by a dark, primal calculus she could neither comprehend nor accept. At last, Victor broke. The source is in Newark. It arrived on container ships, declared as textiles and machine components. My contact there would divert specific containers prior to customs inspection, and I would arrange their transport to Meridian. Provide the contact, Dante commanded. Victor uttered a name, alien to Lila, which Dante transcribed. Your clientele? Primarily street-level operators, those who move product while evading the major syndicates. I ensured transactions were minor, consistent, and difficult to track. The number? 30, possibly 40. A comprehensive list was an unacceptable risk. Dante's expression was a mask, a fabrication. A man of your precision would never function without ledgers, revealed the data's location. Victor wavered. It is digital, encrypted, housed on a remote server. Retrieve it. An associate produced a laptop. Victor, hands still secured, clumsily entered a web address and its corresponding password. A complex encrypted file system materialized at the display, a schematic of structured corruption. Dante's eyes absorbed it. Is this the entirety? Every component of significance. Acceptable. With a slight gesture, the information was cloned to a secure drive. What followed? That was the complete scope of my activities within your organization. Discuss Marco. The blood drained from Victor's expression. He... Whose hand was on the vehicle? Who severed the lines? Dante. That incident was 5 years past. Respond to the inquiry. Victor's eyes shut tight. A mechanic named Torres. He had a debt to me. I erased it for a single task. He was ignorant of the target, merely following instructions. His current whereabouts? Deceased. A fatal overdose 2 years ago. I had no involvement in that. A profound quiet descended. Did Marco experience pain? Pardon? When the braking system failed, in the final seconds he understood he was helpless. Was it protracted or instantaneous? Victor's reply was barely audible. I am unable to say. Dante rose, paced, and then pivoted, a singular, savage blow overturning the chair. Victor struck the concrete floor with force. Lila flinched. Dante stood over him, his breathing ragged, the knuckles of his hand likely fractured. That is for Marco, for the 5 years of misplaced self-blame, for eliminating the only family member who did not hope for my ruin. A line of blood escaped Victor's mouth as his gaze lost focus. My apologies, he breathed. No, you regret being exposed. Dante composed himself, grimacing as he flexed his damaged hand. Remove him from my presence, transport him to the state border, and abandon him. If I encounter him in this city again, his life is forfeit. 2 men hoisted Victor, carrying him toward the exit. He was an inert form, offering no resistance, an object to be relocated. After their departure, Dante collapsed into the vacant chair, burying his face in his hands. Lila neared him cautiously. Is your hand fractured? I believe so. It requires medical attention. In due time. He looked at her, and she witnessed his true, profound exhaustion for the first time. He was utterly and profoundly spent. You had no right to be in that location. I am aware. You might have been killed. I am aware. Yet you proceeded. For what reason? Layla occupied the chair across from him. Because you intended to manage this alone, and I believed, I am unsure what I believed, that you might require assistance that I could prove valuable. You were valuable. You identified the patterns, followed the funds, and provided the necessary leverage. But your presence nearly cost you everything. I apologize. Do not simply... He hesitated, seeking the appropriate phrasing. Never repeat this action. I will not. A minute of silence stretched between them. Layla then posed the query that had lingered at the periphery of the entire ordeal. Your brother, Marco, what kind of person was he? Dante's features contorted with something akin to grief before he mastered it. He was intelligent, too intelligent for this life, but his loyalty was too great for him to depart. He constantly urged me to legitimize our operations, to transform our father's empire into something that would not lead to our deaths or imprisonment. I dismissed him as a fool, but you ultimately did it. Only after his death. After Victor arranged his murder, correct. Because Marco was right. The syndicate my father constructed was a toxin to all it contacted. Foes, partners, and kin alike. It was merely a question of time before that poison consumed me as well. Dante got to his feet, cradling his hurt hand. So, I started to implement changes, methodically, discreetly, excising the most corrupt elements, establishing legitimate enterprises. It required 3 years to forge a business that was not perceived as fundamentally illicit. And now Victor sought to pull you back into that existence. Victor never wished for my departure. He cherished the old methods, the violence, the intimidation, the authority. When I severed ties, he interpreted it as an intimate and profound betrayal. Dante headed for the door. Let's go. We must get ahead of this situation before those warehouses are discovered and inquiries begin. The journey back into the city was a silent, strained affair. The emerging dawn, a mixture of pink and slate, seemed a cruel irony against the night's savage events. Lila recognized the symptoms of severe trauma, an ache deep in her bones from sustained tension and the brutal scenes replaying in her consciousness. Upon returning to their base, Dante initiated immediate containment protocols to manage the fallout. His responses were surgically sharp: communications to port authorities, notifications to property managers about unauthorized access, and legal teams dispatched to frame his corporation as a victim of internal fraud. By midday, he had fabricated a perfect, wholly untrue narrative. The public account asserted that a rogue employee at Meridian had conducted an unsanctioned operation without the corporation's awareness. The responsible individuals were handled internally, preventing law enforcement involvement. Morelli Enterprises pledged its complete cooperation, highlighting its newly implemented security protocols. The narrative was impermeable, polished, and an utter fiction. Yet it was engineered to withstand scrutiny, bolstered by the 3 years Dante had dedicated to cultivating his legitimate public persona. You are remarkably skilled at this, Lila noted as he concluded a call. At what? He responded. At rewriting the past after the fact, creating the illusion you were never involved. I was not involved. Victor exploited my corporation without my consent. That is the truth. But you suspected this was possible for 2 months. I had an intuition. I lacked confirmation until you provided it. Dante settled back in his seat. Here lies the distinction between an accomplice and a victim. Victims earn compassion. The culpable draw investigations. And you are which? A victim? Dante met her gaze for a protracted, weighty moment. I am a man constructing a legitimate enterprise in the ruins of a corrupt one. This requires me to determine which facts are revealed and which are interred. You are not required to approve, but you must comprehend it to function here. And if I am unable, then your tenure is over and we part ways. Layla contrasted his ultimatum with the preceding 12 hours of her existence. The visceral brutality, the detached psychological games, and the impeccable manner in which Dante engineered Victor's downfall while cementing his own blamelessness. His methodical brand of amorality should have driven her toward the nearest federal authority. However, it did not. Beneath the monstrous deeds, she perceived a distorted form of justice, a man avenging his sibling, undertaking enormous risks to protect his company and its employees. He had extracted her from a lethal scenario. A profoundly irrational choice when abandoning her would have been the more prudent strategy. "I will remain," she declared finally. Dante offered a subtle nod, as though affirming a conclusion he had already reached. "Excellent. We have a vast amount of work ahead." The following 2 weeks were an exhibition in purging Victor's influence. Distribution hubs were discreetly emptied and closed. The Newark shipments were intercepted, their illicit contents surrendered to the authorities. Victor's buyers received quiet advisories of a compromised network, encouraging them to secure new suppliers. Dante orchestrated everything with his signature unnerving precision, controlling intelligence, assigning tasks, and ensuring every potential complication was neutralized before it could develop. Observing his methods, Lila began to discern the genuine structure of his power. It was not founded solely on intimidation, though that was undeniably a cornerstone. It was predicated on a severe pragmatism, on the conviction that any issue could be resolved with the correct application of force. It was about understanding precisely when to deploy a weapon and when to deploy a document. Concurrently, she detected a transformation within herself. The impulse that led her to expose wrongdoing at her previous company had not vanished. It was merely being rechanneled. Rather than revealing offenses to the authorities, she was now aiding in their concealment within a clandestine internal framework. The absence of this internal conflict was an unsettling development. 3 weeks following the incident, a summons from Dante brought her to his office. The hour was late, past 9 in the evening, with the building deserted and still. A bottle of whiskey stood on his desk, accompanied by 2 tumblers. "Care for a drink?" he inquired. "I have previously stated my taste." "Regard it as a celebration. We have been exonerated. The authorities have concluded their inquiry into Meridian. Victor has not appeared since his release, and for the first time in a long while, we are showing a profit, no longer hemorrhaging funds to fictitious consultants." Layla settled into a chair, accepting the glass he presented. "Where do you suppose he is?" "Victor? I would wager South America. A place with permissive extradition policies and affordable real estate. He will likely reestablish himself, though not in our territory. But should he return?" "He will not." Dante drank a measure of the amber spirit. He understands that a reappearance would compel a reaction from me, and on the next occasion there will be no forewarning. A tense quiet occupied the room. Then, quite suddenly, Dante spoke. "I thank you." Layla raised her eyes to meet his. "For what purpose?" "Shh. For discovering the anomalies. For possessing the resolve to disregard my directives to cease. For," he hesitated, his phrasing meticulously selected, "for not fleeing when you understood what this organization truly represents." The notion of flight did occur to me on more than one occasion. Yet you refrained. That is the salient point. Replenishing their glasses, he continued, "My previous statement holds. Utility is the price of continued association. But your status has evolved beyond utility, Ms. Bennett. You are now a cornerstone." A warmth bloomed on Layla's neck, a physiological betrayal she struggled to mask. "I am merely performing my duties." "You are exceeding them. You are helping me construct an enterprise with longevity, the kind of legacy Marco would have envisioned." The tension in Dante's expression softened. He would have admired your intellect, your refusal to concede to a difficult problem. "I regret not having the chance to know him." "As do I." Dante rose, moving to the window to observe the sprawling city lights. For 5 years, my existence was fueled by pure wrath, directed at Victor, at myself, at a cosmos that would steal Marco, the singular beacon of integrity in our lineage. That fury instilled in me a deep caution. It propelled me from the world responsible for his death. But it also encased me in ice. I drove away anyone who ventured too close, for intimacy is a tactical weakness. He pivoted from the window, his gaze finding hers. You have managed to penetrate that armor. Layla's own heart rate accelerated. What are you implying? I am implying that somewhere between the shattering of my vase and your near-fatal loyalty to my company, your well-being became a priority, and that creates a complication. A complication? Layla echoed. I am your employer, you are my subordinate. A power differential exists that renders anything further profoundly unethical, even predatory. However, he paused as if measuring the weight of his next words. Despite this, my thoughts are consumed by you. I find myself curious about your perspectives on matters entirely unrelated to our work. I desire to understand you in ways that have no bearing on your proficiency with financial models. Layla placed her glass down, her hand unsteady. Dante, this confession is unnecessary. This is not a proposition. It is a statement of fact, and considering our shared history, you are owed the truth. She stood, circumnavigated the imposing desk, and paused several feet away, close enough to discern the faint silver of a scar near his eyebrow, close enough to detect the scent of whiskey and the crisp, expensive fragrance that was uniquely his. My thoughts have been occupied by you as well, she admitted, her voice hushed. In ways entirely disconnected from my professional role. The reality is frightening, given who you are, who I am, and the certainty that this is quite possibly the most ill-advised notion we have ever entertained. Quite possibly, Dante conceded. But the thought is not one I wish to relinquish. Nor do I. For a suspended moment they remained, the space between them saturated with unspoken intent. Then, deliberately, allowing her ample time to retreat, he raised his uninjured hand to her face. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, a gesture of tenderness that stood in stark opposition to his entire persona. Tell me to withdraw, he whispered. No. His kiss was tentative, an inquiry, as if he were testing the reality of the moment, half expecting her to dissolve. When she responded in kind, the dynamic shifted, the contact deepening into something that felt preordained. They separated, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. This alters the entire landscape, he said. I am aware. There will be speculation, whispers that you leveraged intimacy for advancement, that I am exploiting my position. Let them speculate. Oh, Layla, their opinions are irrelevant to me. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. This is what I care about. You. The nature of what is forming between us, all the rest is simply background noise. Dante's smile, for the first time she had witnessed, genuinely illuminated his eyes. You will undoubtedly be my undoing. Quite possibly, she retorted, turning his own word against him. But it promises to be captivating. For 3 months their affair remained a secret, a stunning feat in a workplace culture that ran on gossip. Claire, however, knew within 2 weeks. Layla perceived it in the receptionist's subtle shift from professional deference to a look of quiet, analytical acceptance, though deciphering Claire was always a formidable challenge. The murmurings among the staff did eventually begin. Inquisitive glances tracked her path whenever Dante summoned her to his office, signaling a clear curiosity about her evolving influence. Lila's attempt at maintaining a facade of detached professionalism was a noble but ultimately doomed effort. The prevailing theory is that your promotion was a direct consequence of our physical relationship, Dante observed one evening at his apartment, their shared haven from observation. Is that an inaccurate hypothesis? Lila countered from the couch, engrossed in a document while dressed in his shirt, a potent symbol of their connection. From a logical standpoint, no. From a chronological one, yes. Your indispensability was proven well before this arrangement began. Arrangement? Layla queried, pressing him for clarity. Is that the term we are using? Dante paused his activity. What term would you prefer? Something less ephemeral, something that acknowledges the reality of this. He closed his laptop and joined her on the sofa. It is real. I simply lack the vocabulary for it that is not either insufficient or premature. Relationship? That is functional. Good. Layla returned to her work, but he gently relieved her of the papers. There is another matter we must address, he stated. That phrase rarely introduces positive developments. It is not negative, merely complex. His deliberate word choice underscored the gravity of his next disclosure. A loose end remains from the Victor situation, an issue that will inevitably surface if left unresolved. A knot of apprehension tightened in Layla's stomach. What issue? His clientele, the list of buyers from his server. The majority were insignificant, but several are linked to larger criminal syndicates. Those syndicates are now inquiring about the disruption to their supply chain. Can you not simply inform them that Victor has ceased operations and that they must secure a new source? That communication was dispatched 3 weeks ago. While most have complied, 2 organizations continue to investigate Victor's abrupt disappearance. One of these has connections to my father's former world. Layla's posture became rigid. What are the implications? It implies they possess enough knowledge of my history to be suspicious, to speculate whether I have reverted to my previous life. Dante rose and paced toward this window. I have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow evening on neutral ground. It is meant to be a discussion, but such talks invariably carry implicit demands. What sort of demands? That I either assume Victor's role as their new supplier or provide a compelling argument for my refusal. And if your argument is unpersuasive, they will conclude I eliminated Victor to absorb his enterprise. This will lead to an offer of partnership or an attempt to remove me as a competitor. The anxiety in Layla's voice was palpable. You cannot attend alone. I will not. Marcus and Leo will accompany me. He turned toward her. I am disclosing this because the situation could become volatile. Should something happen, you must be aware of the company's contingency plan. Nothing is going to happen. The probability is low, but I no longer base my strategies on probability. He returned to the couch, the air between them thick with tension. As per corporate protocol, my incapacitation activates a power transfer to a pre-selected board. You were appointed last week. Claire holds the documentation. Her response was a mere whisper. Dante, this is not an exercise in drama. It is strategic foresight. There is a distinction. His hand settled over hers. You have been as instrumental in building this company as I have. You have earned the authority to guide its destiny. Should I be removed from the equation? You will not be. That is the objective, but objectives are not assurances. She suppressed the urge to label his thinking as paranoid, understanding that in his reality, it was simply the ultimate form of risk mitigation. I understand, she acknowledged, but upon your return tomorrow, we are changing topics. We will discuss something ordinary, like the menu for dinner or the unfortunate color of these walls. A ghost of a smile touched Dante's lips. Agreed. The following evening, Lila moved through his apartment like a specter, her efforts to work proving futile. The meeting was set for 9. It was now 10:30, and her 2 messages remained unread in the digital ether. At 11, her resolve broke, and she called Marcus, his chief of security. He is functional, Marcus stated with clipped precision, anticipating her query. The meeting has been prolonged. He will make contact upon its conclusion. Define functional. Viable, unharmed, and engaged in strenuous negotiations. The opposing party is utilizing stalling tactics. How strenuous? The sort that requires strategic patience rather than a kinetic response. Rest assured, Ms. Bennett, you would be the first to know if the situation had deteriorated. Layla ended the call, anchoring herself to Marcus's professional calm. She paced for another 40 minutes before her phone finally signaled life. I am en route, Dante's voice came through. The situation is resolved. What is the definition of resolved? It means I convinced them that I am not, nor will I ever be, involved in their particular field of enterprise. They were displeased, but ultimately conceded to the terms. That is all? They simply conceded? I may have offered a financial apology for the disruption caused by Victor's exit, while making it abundantly clear that further interest in my activities would be detrimental to their continued health. God, Dante. It is concluded, Layla. That is the only detail of consequence. The ambient sounds of the city bled through the line. I will arrive in 20 minutes, at which point we will have the mundane conversation you requested. He arrived in 18, appearing exhausted, but entirely unharmed. Layla's embrace was a violation of their unspoken rules, fierce with relief. I am perfectly fine, he murmured into her hair. I am aware. Marcus informed me. That knowledge did little to make the waiting more tolerable. You must adapt. This is an unavoidable aspect of being with me. Layla pulled away slightly. Being with you, is that the nomenclature we are settling on now? Unless you have a superior suggestion. No, that one is perfectly adequate. Her kiss was a fragile truce, an analytical study of aged whiskey and some other, more elusive element. I'm holding you to that promise of a normal conversation, she insisted. No more strategy tonight. No whispers of veiled threats, just us. They had food delivered that they never ate, its warmth fading into the evening. A film played, its narrative failing to penetrate their shared quiet. They fell asleep on the sofa, entwined in a posture that guaranteed future aches but offered immediate solace. For one evening, Dante Morelli was not the former head of a syndicate meticulously crafting a legitimate empire. He was simply a man, one who laughed at the wrong moment, felt the cold of Layla's feet, and held her as if she were a rare and brittle artifact in need of absolute protection. It represented the most ordinary evening Layla had known in months. a delicate seed of possibility for what they might become. The true measure of their new reality arrived 6 weeks later when the Federal Bureau of Investigation appeared at Morelli Enterprises with questions about Meridian Holdings. Lila was at her desk as two agents, their authority and invisible uniform, proceeded past Claire toward Dante's office. She rose to intercept, but his door was already opening. "Gentlemen," Dante's voice was a carefully constructed facade of cooperation, the tone of a man anticipating this very moment. "Please come in. Ms. Bennett, hold all my calls." The door clicked shut. Lila collapsed back into her chair, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm as she feigned productivity. The narrative they had woven was hermetically sealed. She was intimate with every thread, having helped to spin it herself. Yet having that narrative stress-tested by federal agents was an entirely different form of pressure than a rehearsal. After 45 minutes, the agents departed, their expressions conveying dissatisfaction, but offering no grounds for immediate action. Moments later, Dante materialized in his doorway. "My office," was his only command. Lila retrieved her tablet and followed. He secured the door behind them, the weight of the situation palpable as he sat. "They are aware of Victor," he announced. "To what extent?" "That he managed an operation through Meridian and then vanished precisely when we reported an unauthorized use of our resources." "Their objective is to ascertain whether I was complicit in his disappearance or merely a victim of his financial crimes." "What was your response?" "The unvarnished truth. My assistant identified accounting irregularities. Our subsequent internal audit revealed that Gerald Renton was operating an unsanctioned side venture. We terminated Renton and submitted our report. Victor Rains was Renton's external associate who absconded before he could be questioned." "Did they accept it?" "They remain skeptical. However, suspicion does not constitute proof, and our meticulous planning has denied them any tangible evidence." Dante looked at her. "They will want your statement. Likely tomorrow. They will inquire about your findings, the chronology of events, and whether you observed any indication of my prior knowledge." Layla's throat felt like parchment. "What should I tell them?" "The truth. You discovered discrepancies during a routine audit. You reported them directly to me. I initiated an investigation and dismissed the responsible parties. Offer no opinions. Do not engage in speculation. Do not attempt to shield me with fabrications. Simply state the facts as they transpired." "Including the detail that I entered that building after you explicitly forbade it?" "Especially that detail. It substantiates your independent action, which provides them with exculpatory evidence against any theory of collusion on your part." His strategy was a perfect reflection of his signature cold logic, yet it created a profound moral dissonance within her. When she questioned the plan's ethical framework, he shifted his tactics. He commanded her to accept any immunity agreement offered in exchange for testimony against him, framing it as a clinical necessity to insulate her from his world's fallout, a move that effectively neutralized her agency. His directive was a transparent exercise of control. In a desperate tactical shift, she confessed her love, a disclosure made under immense psychological pressure. The male subject, Dante, disregarded her emotional revelation, categorizing it as an insufficient rationale for committing perjury. She clarified her intent to be truthful, but affirmed that her allegiance to him was absolute, a textbook indicator of a trauma bond. Lila attempted to absolve him of any need for reciprocity. She asserted that his isolation was now a shared burden, a declaration that elicited a physical response. He kissed her with an intensity born of desperation and relief. He reciprocated her declaration of love, but attached an immediate caveat. Her survival must supersede her loyalty. Her retort was that her decision would be contingent upon the circumstances. He met this act of defiance with a smile, a silent acknowledgement of her indomitable will. The federal questioning of Lila commenced the following day in a room engineered for psychological leverage. The subject presented a polished account, strategically omitting the details of her abduction and the unsanctioned interrogation that followed. These omissions were a calculated choice to maintain her credibility by excluding bizarre, non-verifiable claims that might suggest she was a willing co-conspirator. The agents documented her testimony with detached professionalism. Their final line of questioning pivoted to her romantic involvement with Dante, a standard tactic to establish a compelling motive. She affirmed the relationship, placing its origin at 3 months prior, well after the conclusion of the internal audit. My official capacity was his assistant. Our close proximity was a function of our professional roles, she articulated. When asked if their personal bond had compromised her professional judgment, she delivered a firm denial, asserting that the corporate structure had been her sole directive. Following the interview, Lila felt as if she had endured a medical procedure with uncertain, potentially life-altering outcomes. She later detailed the agent's specific inquiries about their relationship to Dante. She meticulously reviewed her testimony, confirming her adherence to their pre-established timeline. When she solicited his assessment of her performance, he remarked that their relationship furnished the authorities with a rationale to question her veracity. Dante then posited that without evidence of a pre-existing connection, their theory remained mere conjecture. 2 weeks later, the investigation was formally closed, citing a lack of grounds for indictment, though an official letter recommended the implementation of more stringent internal controls. The result could only be termed a victory in the loosest sense, given the catastrophic collateral effects. The board was hollowed out by a wave of resignations, while crucial client relationships were severed, indicating a total collapse of confidence. Subsidiaries on the public market saw their stock prices dive by 12%. Dante analyzed the damage assessments with his signature detached manner, predicting a recovery built on pure, unyielding force. When Lila inquired about a time frame, he estimated 6 months to 1 year. His immediate strategy was to mount a relentless campaign of manufactured legitimacy. Examining the bleak financial data, Lila put forward the idea of a philanthropic arm, a foundation. Dante was scornful at first, but then recognized the strategic value of such an entity for cleansing their public profile. Lila redirected his focus, clarifying that its true mission was to honor a man named Marco with a meaningful legacy, not simply to apply reputational first aid. Dante acquiesced, remembering that Marco had always advocated for building the family's future, not dismantling it. From this discussion, the Marco Morelli Foundation was established, its mission a channel of scholarships for the city's overlooked youth. It functioned as a masterpiece of public relations, gradually altering the public perception of Dante and his entire operation. The pressure was an immense burden, but within that crucible of intense stress, a significant internal transformation began. The incessant vigilance in Dante's eyes began to diminish, replaced by foreign behaviors like an unprompted smile. He mandated an entire weekend devoid of any corporate intrusion. In a secluded setting, he articulated a new perception of his reality. He was no longer anticipating imminent disaster. For the first time, he spoke of a future that did not necessarily conclude in ruin. Lila met his gaze, affirming their precarious peace and the success of the Foundation. Dante's quiet assent was a concession to a novel sense of tranquility. 6 months following the investigation's conclusion, at the Foundation's inaugural ceremony, 20 scholarships were awarded. Dante stood before the attendees and spoke of his brother with a raw, unguarded sincerity. He discussed Marco's belief in the power of second chances. From the rear of the room, Lila observed a tempest of pride and the overwhelming relief of survival churning inside her. Following the formal remarks, a young scholarship recipient approached Dante to express her gratitude. He dismissed her thanks, stating that the award was simply a key to a door she must open herself, and added a condition that she must one day do the same for someone else. The interaction appeared to resolve something within him. He murmured that Marco would have cherished this moment, a sentiment Lila could only affirm. They observed the quiet proceedings, a moment that cast into stark relief the immense and harrowing journey they had undertaken. Their connection, forged in conflict, had been reconfigured into a cautious alliance. The fractures remained, acrimonious disputes over control and unilateral decisions he had made. The ghosts of his past were a constant pressure on the delicate future they were attempting to construct. Yet their mutual refusal to capitulate was a silent testament to what was possible. A year later, Dante proposed marriage. It was not a romantic gesture, but a business proposition presented in the sterile environment following an arduous meeting. Lila laughed at the sheer clinical nature of the proposal. He remained resolute, his gaze unwavering as he spoke of a life with her, something tangible beyond the violence and the financial statements, something that is solely ours, Dante clarified. She closed her laptop and moved to occupy his space, settling onto his lap, a welcome disruption in his structured world that elicited a smile. Yes, she affirmed. Yes, he repeated, requiring the confirmation. Yes, I will marry you despite your utterly clumsy proposal and the fact that you are incapable of deactivating your professional mindset. Those are valid criticisms. I am marrying you regardless. 6 months later, they were wed in an understated gathering at the Foundation, attended by a small group of witnesses. Claire was present, her expression a careful mask of what could almost be interpreted as approval. A transformation in Dante became apparent. A longtime associate observed that he now occasionally used dialogue before defaulting to violence. Lila's parents remained suspended in disbelief, unable to grasp their daughter's commitment to a man under federal surveillance. Their partnership was an exercise in managed turmoil, discovering a peculiar, effective cadence. The ensuing years were an unforgiving struggle to pull a criminal organization into the light, pursued by the specters of its history and the judgment of the present. Yet there were triumphs. The Foundation blossomed, becoming a symbol of hope for innumerable students. The enterprise explored new territories, creating partnerships founded on trust rather than intimidation. Dante's public persona gradually shifted from that of a syndicate boss to an advocate for second chances. After 2 years, Lila was appointed COO, her competence silencing the murmurs of nepotism. She fortified the company's very framework, instilling transparency and resilience, and emerged as the champion of their quest to shatter inherited cycles of violence. They purchased a home, creating a space to coexist as both partners and separate people. A dog was introduced, which Dante greeted with a theatrical irritation that poorly veiled his instant fondness. Their bond was forged and hardened in the crucible of dispute and concession. 5 years from their initial meeting, Lila stood outside the Foundation's new headquarters, a revitalized building in a regenerated urban district. She traced her fingers along a wall of case files, a mosaic of faces representing the lives they had altered. Dante appeared at her side, his voice hushed. "We made this." Lila conceded that this existence was far from what she had ever envisioned, but it was superior. He reached for her, admitting he never thought a man of his kind could navigate his way out of the abyss. He told her she had shown him otherwise. Lila gently rephrased his sentiment, saying it was their mutual achievement, that his own desire to reform had to exist first. He granted that her faith in him had been the catalyst. Lila posed a question about which part of their path was the most significant. Answering it herself, she identified the process, the perpetual effort and reconstruction, as a state she called real and infinitely preferable to perfect. Dante replied with a deep, unhurried kiss, a surprisingly open display of affection within this monument to their new reality. As they separated, Lila saw a young man near the entrance, his nervousness an echo of her own past. He was there for an interview. She offered a smile and ushered him in. Late that evening, within the tranquility of their house, Dante uttered a phrase she had never heard him speak. "I'm happy." In the soft light, Lila studied his expression, seeking its authenticity. He clarified that for the first time in memory, he wasn't bracing for imminent disaster. She assured him he had earned this feeling, as had she. She then enumerated the minor habits of his that drove her mad, and he conceded to every point. He then noted her own compulsive need for structure, a trait she readily admitted to. When he inquired about her recent private investigations, she admitted to a small violation of his privacy, and he simply chuckled. They drifted to sleep intertwined in the sanctuary they had built, a life constructed from the ruins of their histories. This was no fable. There was no promise of perpetual calm. More tempests would surely rise, but they had one another and a foundation that was reshaping destinies, all resting on something more durable than fear. They were the living embodiment of the idea that individuals could transform, that a connection could be forged under the harshest conditions, and that brutality and compassion could occupy the same soul. Ultimately, this was sufficient. For the two of them, it was the whole world.